So we're almost ready for sewing now. The next job is just to mark out the little casings that we're going to create for the pipe cleaners inserts, and we're going to mark up our individual masks now. You can go with a pencil. I'm just actually going to use, because I've got lots of bright colours on this, I'm actually going to use an air eraser. So I'm just marking up the last two masks, and then I'm going to head on over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew these channels. So we just want a 5mm casing here. It'll be just wide enough for us to feed in the pipe cleaner, and not too loose that it's going to fall out, not too tight that we're going to struggle getting it in there. Don't forget to backstitch. Okay, so we're ready for the pipe cleaners now after that quick bit of stitching. Do not wreck your sewing scissors by cutting up these. Don't forget they've got wire in the middle. Okay, so we've got our 7 bits of pipe cleaner now, and just open it up till you find the casing and then just slide them in place. And you can just see how easy that is. So we're not going to stitch these pipe cleaners in, they are just going to sit in that channel, which is why you need to keep it nice and tight, no looser than the 5 to 6mm. It means that the user can actually remove them if they don't want them to go through the wash. Also, if they get too out of shape, then you can actually just insert a new piece, which is great. So once you've got your 2 edges lined up, we are going to mark it up on the creased side, the side that's got a crease in it, because that actually is your seam allowance. So press that in earlier to make it a lot easier when we get to this stage. I'm starting at the bottom end of the fabric this time because this is the point at which I'm going to start. So I'm going to work my masks back from this direction, and you just need to mark the 8cm opening and just a mark for the edge of the mask so you know where to set your template down again. Once everything's marked up, you're ready for the sewing machine, and you just need to start at the top end. Remember, you can use the crease as your seam allowance because that's 1 centimetre in from the edge. Just also be careful to keep that bottom box pleat out of the way while you're stitching. You don't want to catch it in your stitching. That will be really frustrating, so just make sure you keep that box pleat out of the way. The only other thing I'm going to show you is a little bit of crafty reversing, which is a good way to backstitch. So we're coming up to our first opening there, and we're just going to stitch right up to it, reverse, stitch back, and instead of finishing there, we're just going to reverse back again so that that loose thread is in the middle of that bank of stitching rather than being right on the edge there. Cut your threads. This is great if you're doing pencil cases, anything like that, even for a skirt actually, to make sure that your loose threads are not right on the edge where it's going to get all the stress and tension out. This side, I don't know if you noticed it, but I've moved past the starting point because we're going to start a little way in, and I'm going to reverse back to the purple marker that I've made. There we go. Forward, back again, and again the same thing. We've just means we've left our loose threads in the middle of this bank of stitching rather than right on the edge at the edge of the opening. That's one of my sewing top tips. Because we got those pleats, I'm going to just pull it out from the inside really carefully instead of sticking my hand in there and stabbing myself. Oh, you can see one of the openings there, as if you're turning, you know, like a loop turner basically. Just use your hand a bit like a loop turner. You can see how it's meant to pleat. If you open it up, you can push it back in from the end and put a pin right through all layers just to hold it. But you can see it's going to be really easy to put a filter layer in between there because it's just going to sit in between the pleats. It's another reason why you can't just like fold the whole thing in half and make essentially one box pleat through double layers, because you need the pleats to be opposing. You can't have one sat inside the other because then obviously it wouldn't work to put the filter material back inside. We're looking at the wrong side of it now. We're looking at it from the inside, and you can see the openings here all the way along this edge. Just flip and see how the top pleat's looking. That's looking okay. So we're just going to take the pins now and pin through all layers. One pin going through both sides. You can see what I'm doing there. So just take out the pin on the other side if there are any still in there. Essentially that's our mask in place. we're just going to press open or press back this seam a little bit now. Okay, now because we'd already pre-creased the seam allowance right back at the beginning, we should be able to get a nice edge on this last seam on the bottom there. So here we are looking at the top side. Just press that down. Grab your filter mask template again and just mark out the individual masks. Lining right up to the edge. Masks marked up and ready to sew. And remember, we're sewing 5mm either side of the line to split the masks up. I just wanted to say a little bit of comment about this pattern. It's not my design. There are lots, I'm sure you've seen, there are lots of designs for this type of filter mask on the internet. All I've done is work out how we can do it neatly and efficiently to make masks in bulk rather than doing single ones. And I've managed to tie in a few what I think are time-saving techniques as well. So the pleating, when you're doing it over such a long length of fabric, can get quite complicated, but hopefully the templates and the box pleat assistance will really help to speed that along. Certainly the more you do, the easier it gets. Our masks are going to have the opening for the filter in the bottom. Quite a lot of them have them at the top. I just thought that made it extra complicated, and it also stitched in whatever you're using up here as a bit of metal or wire, whatever you're using, to get that to sort of fit nicely around the nose. I wanted to keep that open so that these items are replaceable if anything goes wrong with it. As I said earlier, if it's worn and bendy, or if it starts to rust, like I say, we don't know. That's why I've left them open, so it's a removable part, and even though it's a little bit fiddly getting to the inside of it, you can get to the inside of it and replace it if you need to. The two pleats have to be separate so that the filter material goes in between them when the pleats are then opened out. And we've got quite a lot going on here with 1.5 meters of fabric, so hopefully complicated made easy. Right, so we're over to the sewing machine now, and we're just going to sew 5mm either side. So just so you're not flipping through one side to the other, one side to the other, and some of you might have thought of doing it this way before I have, but I just thought I'd put it in this tutorial in case you haven't. So I'm going to line all of my dividing lines up on the left hand toe, and we're just going to sew down all of them that way. So here we go, forward stitch, back stitch, sew down. Might have been cleverer to put a few pins in. And then I'm going to go across to the next one and do exactly the same. Sew down using the left hand toe as my guide. Carry on all the way down. Okay, and when you get down to the other end, all you do is flip your fabric round, start to fold back the other way, and again you just need to line up with the left hand toe, and you just stitch the other side of the line. So that you might just find that a little bit easier than keep switching over from left to right, left to right. If you just want to keep it all on the left hand side or on the right hand side, that's just an easy way to do it. And don't forget to just stitch down either end just to hold those pleats in place whilst when you do the next bit. Another familiar bit for anybody who's done the 2 and 3 layer masks, because now we're just going to cut in between those 2 stitching lines, just following the line that you've drawn on to get all your individual masks. Careful not to catch your stitching, because that's what's going to hold our pleats in place while we do the next bit. 4. And there you can see 7 pretty uniform looking masks so far. Now we've got a fun bit that's really going to speed things up for the finish, and you need your elastic and a ruler. And I'm just going to cut some 25cm lengths of elastic. So we're going to use binding, bias binding, And for those of you that haven't used it before, we're going to pin it along. I'm going to pin it along this crease. We're working on the right side, first of all, of the mask. And you remember how to identify the right side, because obviously the wrong side has got the opening pouch. So I'm just going to pin it in place using the crease line to help. That's going to be our stitching line. At the top end, you just want to turn that little return back on itself, and if you need to, just put a pin in horizontally instead of vertically, and then we're just going to sew down. Quite handy having that little pin there. I was just using it there to help push things through to avoid it getting caught on your feed dogs. At the bottom end where we didn't tuck it under, we're going to do that now. I'm going to use a pin, or if you've got a really skinny unpicker, it's really good for this job, because you just flatten it, help that ease under the presser foot, and then just slide it out of the way once you're in the right spot. I should have just took that bit of waist binding out of the way for us. Right, so that's the first bit. Now then, I'm going to flip this over the other side. Having tucked those around, it gives us a really neat finish on the front, because you've already got an edge. I hate having things overhanging. I'm very fussy about stuff like that, so I always like to try and keep it neatened off. And there's no point trying to do the bottom bit, tuck it under as you go, because more than likely it'll pull out and you'll end up with it overhanging. So it's much better to do it in 2 stages. Catch the first one because it pushes against the feed dogs, and then when you finish that, turn around and just do the same with the other end, because it'll push it towards the fabric rather than away from it. Right, so now we're going to turn in the binding, and again we're going to have the same problem with this bit here potentially sticking out, so I'm just going to turn in that little corner so it's a bit like a mitered edge. So it's going to look like that, which should be neater anyway, and which will possibly help with the elastic. So I'm going to do that at the top and at the bottom. Right, so we've got our part bound edge. So we're just going to hold the elastic in place. I'm going to fold back that corner of the binding. It's a bit fiddly, but it'll look good when it's done. Just to hold it, I'm just going to put one pin in, so you can see how it looks there. So you've got your folded edge of binding and your elastic sticking proud out the top. I'm just going to start to sew down, back stitch. Take out the pin now, it's all secured, and then at the bottom end, just take a few seconds to turn in the corner of your binding, hold it all in place, and then sew down to the bottom. Keeping an eye on your stitching for neatness. Now you can use something now like an unpicker to just hold down the end of your bias binding. If you've got good solid pins that aren't bendy, you could also use a pin for this job. Oops, and you'll see that it just helps to hold that in place as you slide it under the press foot, and then back stitch, and we're done. Okay, that's one side. So this time I've set it up, but I've knotted the elastic already, which means we don't have to faff around with that job afterwards either, because it's already set in. If you are going to try this method, you do need to be careful that you don't catch it, and always try and put the loose ends of the elastic in towards the fold of the casing. Here we go with the second side. Make sure you pull the elastic out of the way. Once you've got your fabric anchored, spend that moment just sorting out the bottom end of your binding, which is always a little bit fiddly, and tuck that knot right out of the way, and then sew down. You can knot them however you want. You can feed your elastic in as you go. You can loop and knot your elastic and feed that in as you go. Or if you prefer to, you can leave the elastic out altogether and then feed it through afterwards when you've got all your masks made up. That's just personal choice, as long as they all look the same and that your knots are encased